Okay, Boker Tov, everybody. So we are we were in Daf Kafchet Amud Aleph. Let's just go back again from the beginning of the Mishnah. This is where we left off. We started talking about previously we'd been talking about shechita, we've been talking about bechor, different dinim related to behemoth, and now we get to a number of dinim which are related to uvdin dechol, things which appear as weekday activities. I had a friend once who was very, very perplexed by this whole concept of uvdin dechol, weekday activities. I said, I don't understand. If you're doing it on Shabbos, then it's not a weekday activity anymore. So it's not quite so simple. It's not quite the way it works. And generally speaking, we say that things which appear, things which you would normally do on a weekday, right? It's not. Sometimes you'll hear the colloquial form, right? It's not Shabbostic. That essentially is the more halachic formulation of that. So that's what's referred to as uvdin dechol. The difficulty with uvdin dechol is not always so easy to define, and it's not always so clear exactly what is or what isn't. For example, as you'll know, there's a big machloket in halakha regarding brushing one's teeth on Shabbat. Okay, there are reasons to be maker, there are reasons to be machmir, different melachot which may or may not be involved. So Rav Ovadia has a tshuva about brushing teeth. So Rav Ovadia says that there are no melachot involved, all the issues of memarech or machek or schita, whatever. He's not concerned for various reasons. Not our topic right now. But he says there's one problem with brushing teeth. You know, Rav Ovadia says the problem with brushing your teeth on Shabbos is, he says uvdin dechol. And therefore, he says if you have a Shabbos toothbrush, you would not. That would not be uvdin dechol anymore. Okay. So there are different views, but there was a number of years ago. I say where the uvdin dechol came up very, very strongly. The whole question of electricity on Shabbat is. We all know that you can't manually operate electric devices on Shabbat or Yom Tov. You can't switch on lights. You can't switch on machinery and all sorts of things. Why is that? So many people think it's got to do with havara, it's got to do with fire. The reason people think that is because certain appliances, certainly in the old days, right, the incandescent light bulbs, there would have been a problem of havara. Nowadays, and if you have a hot plate or other things like that, but nowadays barely anybody uses incandescent light bulbs anymore. Everything's LED, so which works on a different mechanism. Again, not our topic right now. But so there may be anachal boneh, maybe bakir patish, metaken mana, etc. Molid, different explanations that are brought for what the problem is with electricity on Shabbat. So there was somebody a number of years ago who came up with a chiddush, and the chiddush was that when you're using an LED light bulb as opposed to an incandescent light bulb, because of the way it works, there is no melacha involved, and he wanted to say there's no melacha whatsoever. The only issue would be uvdin dechol. This was in a mama which was published. Rabbi Asher Weiss was not happy about this. He tore to shreds. He said it's absolutely inconceivable to say that electricity is only prohibited on Shabbat because of uvdin dechol. Okay, and there's a fascinating. He says it's makepa patish. He's choshesh to a doraita. Fascinating discussion over there. But the point is that uvdin dechol is a real halachic concept, but it's difficult to define. It's not always so clear exactly what its boundaries and parameters are. So our Mishnah is going to talk about a few things, and Gemara a few things which are prohibited because of uvdin dechol, because of they appear to be like weekday activities. And as we'll see, if there's a change from the way that something is done on a weekday, then it's no longer going to be a weekday activity. So says the Mishnah. Mishnah at the top of Daf Kafchet Amud Aleph. Rabbi Yehuda Omer shokel adam basar keneged hakli or keneged hakopitz. Okay, a person wants to sell meat. Butcher is selling the meat. He says if you want to weigh the meat, weighing up the meat, that is the way that you weigh in order to perform the transaction during the weekday. So that is a weekday activity. So you cannot do it in the normal way. But he says shokel adam keneged basar keneged hakli or keneged hakopitz. In other words, you're taking you have your scales with the two sides, and normally they would put weights on the one side to know how much it weighs, and then put the meat on the other side. So he says if you're doing it with weights, that's going to be prohibited. But if you're doing it with a shinoi, so you're putting on a kli, some sort of a utensil, a pot, or whatever it is, or keneged kopitz, which is this big cleaving knife, which they would use. You know how much the knife weighs, and you put the meat on the other side. That is okay, according to Rabbi Yehuda. The Chachamim say no. Say forget about it. You cannot use the scale at all. This is not a satisfactory shinoi. That is not going to be uvdin dechol. Rashi says, Rabbi Yehuda Omer shokel adam basar tabach hamocher basar mishkal, a butcher who is selling meat according to weight, even though you can't weigh it using the weights, Dahainu masechol, that is an act of a weekday activity. Mutar lishkol keneged hakli or keneged hakopit. You can do it in a different way. What is the kopit? He says sakin gadol shekotzvin bo basar. That is a big knife used to cut up the meat. Te'ika shinoi v'lo masechol. That is a shinoi. That is a change from the normal way, and there is no longer considered masechol, according to Rabbi Yehuda. Chamim hold differently. So ein mashkichin, ein ma'inin. You can't look at the weights at all. So says the Gemara, "My kolikar." What do you mean at all? It would have been enough if Chachamim had just said "Ein mashkichin b'kaf moznaim." Why do we say kol ikar? What is that adding? Says Rashi, "My kolikar, my atal rabuye." What are you coming to include? Ein kolikar, name of Chachamim osrin. You could have just said Chachamim osrin. Right? Why do you have to say it like this? Samash Shmuel, afilu l'shamor min ha'achbarim. Says even if you're hanging up your meat on these scales in order to protect it from mice, nonetheless, because you hang them up high, nonetheless, that still looks like you're weighing them in order to sell. That looks like weekday activity, according to Chachamim. Says Rashi, afilu shamor min ha'achbarim. Don't place them on the scale that are hanging up high. Amar Avidi bar Avin, v'hada talia betalita. Says already bar Avin, that is when you hang it on a special hook that it has. The talia betalita, says Rashi. Betabat shetolin otan ba, a special hook where you, a special ring or special hook where you hang these scales in order to weigh the meat. Sheshoklin the michse kinono l'shem mishkal. Then it looks like you're putting it there in order to weigh it. But if you're not doing it like that, then it's okay. Then it doesn't appear to be like the weekday activity. V'amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel, tabach uman asur lishkor basar biyad. V'amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel, tabach uman asur lishkor basar b'mayim. Okay, so not only using the scales, but for an expert butcher, and this is the way sometimes he uses the scales, sometimes he doesn't. You go into a shop, somebody who knows. He looks at the different pieces. You say, I want a kilo or whatever. He looks at it. He says, okay, this is approximately. So there are different ways of measuring. You can measure with his hands. He puts it in his hands and he feels how much it weighs, or he does it in a kli with water in order to displace the water and to see exactly how much it weighs. So I thought those ways are forbidden as well. That also looks like weekday activity. Asur lasot beit yad babasal. You also can't make a handle in the meat. Again, we spoke about this last time. Nowadays, it's much easier. You have your polystyrene tray and you have your plastic and it's all wrapped up and it's all very, very nice. But in those days, you would just, I guess, carry your piece of meat home. So you have this big piece of meat. Remember once after we got married, we lived in Nachlaot. We used to live right across the shuk. And all the butchers are over there would walk outside. And on the street, you'd always see these big pieces of meat hanging out there, the carcasses they bring to the garbage. It was all very, very appetizing. So, but you take your big piece of meat, and they would make a beitza. They would make a handle inside. Right? There was a certain way of doing this, of cutting a hole in the meat, in order that you can carry it. So Amar Avchia Bar Ashi, Asor Lasot Beit Yad B'Basar. You can't. Rashi says Nekev Lechos Bo. Right, you make a sort of hole in the meat, sort of like a handle to carry it. You can't do that. That also is a weekday activity. Amar Ravina Uviyada Shari. Ravina says if you do it with your hand, it's okay. It's if you cut it properly with a knife that you can't do. But doing with a hand, that's okay. Amar Avuna. Mutar lasot siman b'basar. Ravuna says you can make some sort of a siman, right? What would they do in those days? Again, they didn't have stickers and things necessarily, but they would make a sign in the meat to know whose is whose. Siman b'basar, says Rashi, shelo yachlifeo hanos'o, that you won't know you won't switch it with somebody else's. Reminds you, mentioned Nachlaot before. So one of the shuls in Nachlaot, the story is told, it used to be that back in the day, people didn't have their own ovens, right? They just had one oven in the courtyard or one oven in the Beit Knesset, whatever it was. So everybody would bring their cholent pots into the oven in the shul. So it says how the Gabbai, you think Gabbaim have a hard time today. So the Gabbaim used to hurry up the chazan. Everybody could smell the cholent. Everybody wanted to get home and eat. But how would they know? How would you know whose pot is whose? So they would take a ribbon, they would take a colored ribbon or string, and that they would tie it to the pot, and then of course you'd put it in the oven, and then it would burn, and then nobody would know whose this is, and everybody would get everybody else's cholent. But so you have to be creative in order to know whose food is whose. So they would make a siman in the meat, so they wouldn't switch with somebody else's. That you're allowed to do. That you're allowed to do on Yom Tov. Right, Amar Avona mutar לעשות סימן בבשר, כי הדרבה בר רב הונא מחתך לה atlat karnata, meaning it would cut it in a certain way. Says Rashi, atlat karnata, כשהיה משלח הבשר לביתו, when he would send the meat to his home, היה רגיל לעשות כל חתיכה בעלת 3 קרנות, וכבר היו מכיר אנשי ביתו, שזה היה הסימן שלו. He would cut it all in a sort of triangular shape. He's even got a diagram there in Rashi to see what it would look like, and then everybody would know that that is his piece of meat. It's a bit like, not quite the same. It makes you think of, the barekas. So, you in Israel, there's the Rabbinut has got regulations in terms of what shape you're allowed to make barekas, because everybody knows that a rectangle bareka has got potato and a triangle bareka has got cheese, right? That's a siman. It's actually so the same thing over here. You would have a siman in order to know what whose meat was whose. Rav Chia, Rav Shem bar Rabbi, shoklin mana keneged mana b'yom tov. Okay, so now things start to get a little bit interesting. Here the Gemara goes into the following thing. It says Rabbi Chia, Rabbi Shimon bar Rabbi, when they would split up the meat, right? Shoklin mana keneged mana b'yom tov. They would we spoke that we said you can't weigh things, but yeah, so they would take the two pieces of meat and they would weigh one against the other. Rashi says, Rabbi Chia, Rabbi Shimon bar Rabbi, כשהיו חולקין בשר ביניהם, היו שוקלים אותם מנה כנגד מנה ביום טוב. When they would split up the meat, so to see that I guess that it's the same, they would weigh it up one against the other. So now says I'm going to just wait a minute. Whose opinion is this like? Remember, what did we see in the Mishnah? Rabbi Yehuda says you can weigh so long as you do a shinoi. Chachamim said you aren't allowed to weigh at all. So the question is, if you're going to say like Rabbi Yehuda, so then why are they weighing the meat against the meat? And if we're going to say like Chachamim, how are they allowed to do that at all? So let's see. The Gemara so now asks the question. It says, right, we said Rabbi Chia, Rabbi Shem bar Rabbi, shoklin mana keneged mana b'yom tov. So command, which opinion does this follow? Lo k'Rabbi Yehuda, velo k'Rabbanan. Seemingly, this doesn't fit with anybody. This does not fit with Rabbi Yehuda. This does not fit with Rabbanan. I k'Rabbi Yehuda, ha'ma shokel adam basar keneged hakli, or keneged ha'kopetz. But if we say that it's like Rabbi Yehuda, so what did he say in the Mishnah? He said that you can weigh against you have to make a shinoi, but he said what? You can do against the kli, against a different type of utensil, against this type of knife, right? Right, keneged hakli or keneged hakopetz. Keneged hakli in, keneged midachin lo. So surely when Rabbi Yehuda said that, he means specifically though, it explains me what the shinoi is. So he says like the kli or like the cup. It doesn't mean you can do it against the meat. Rashi says keneged kli in the bechol lav hachi olche aval keneged mana ken derech kol hachokin. And that's the point. On the weekday, why did he say keneged hakli? Because on the weekday, it's not the normal way when you're measuring the meat. You're not going to measure it against the kli or against the knife or something. But to weigh the meat against other pieces of meat during the week, people do that as well when they want to split up when they want to split up. Okay, that's the way they would do it. So therefore, we assume that Rabbi Yehuda was daika when he said keneged hakli or keneged hakopetz and not keneged basar. That was so it doesn't fit with Rabbi Yehuda's opinion. Now Chachamim, it's even more problematic. Right, so if we say keneged kli in keneged midachin lo, I k'Rabbanan. If you're going to say like Rabbanan, well, hang on a second. Ha'amli en mashkin b'gavan zayin kol ikar. Rabbanan said you can't use the scale at all. So certainly this mana keneged mana would not fit according to Rabbanan either. So what do we say? We say Inu David Rabbi Yeshua. So actually there is a third opinion. There's Rabbi Yudan, there's Chachamim, and there's Rabbi Yeshua. These Chachamim who said that you can weigh up the meat, follow the opinion of Rabbi Yeshua. What does Rabbi Yeshua say? So we're going to go into, so he doesn't say, we don't find this explicitly regarding weighing meat on Yom Tov, but we have a Mishnah in Bechorot. It talks about something slightly different, and we're going to assume at this point that that is the opinion of Rabbi Yeshua, and then we're going to see if it all fits together. So what are we saying? Inu David Rabbi Yeshua, the Tanya, the right says as follows: Rabbi Yeshua Mer Shoklin mana keneged mana b'Yom Tov. Okay, so Rabbi Yeshua says you can weigh the meat up against the meat on Yom Tov. Amar Rav Yosef alachak Rabbi Yeshua ho'il v'etnan b'mchorot kvatein. Rav Yosef says that the halacha must follow Rabbi Yeshua, even though it's Rabbi Yeshua Yana Beitza, not our Mishnah, because we have a stam Mishnah. We have a stam Mishnah in Bechorot that follows Rabbi Yeshua. Okay, now we need to prove that our stam Mishnah in Bechorot actually follows Rabbi Yeshua, and that is relevant to this case. So let's see. So Rav Yosef says, how so? Ditnan. The Mishnah in Bechorot says like this. Ditnan. Psulei המוקדשים, הנעתן להקדש, ושוקלין מנה כנגד מנה בבכור. Okay, so we're going to need a little bit of background over here. We'll get into Rashi in a moment. But essentially, this same Mishnah was talking about psulei hamukdashin. What are psulei hamukdashin? That's why I have a korban. I have an animal that's designated as a korban. For whatever reason, it gets a mum. It becomes pasul. So it's now psulei hamukdashin. What do we do? That's it says hanatan hekdesh. Their benefit still, meaning the money, still has to go to hekdesh. V'shoklin mana keneged mana b'buchor. This is obviously the critical line where the Mishnah says that you can weigh up mana keneged mana of a bachor, Okay, so the difference is the weighing up here of the meat. In our case, we're dealing with the question of whether you can weigh meat on Yom Tov. Over there, the question is whether you can weigh the meat, not because of Yom Tov, but essentially it's a maaseh chol, or maybe it's a maaseh bizayon. Meaning, is it a proper way to treat it? You're acting in a mundane manner with what was or what had potential to be kodshim. So let's see. Rashi explains. He says, "Ho'el v'tnan b'bcholot kvatei da'asur lishkor v'lemkor b'chol ba'amum sheshchato kohen b'litra." Rashi says we're going to learn that it's forbidden to go and to sell if you have a b'chol ba'amum. Right, which the Kohen shechted, so you can't go now and weigh it up in the normal way. We don't want to do a mundane action of chol on kodshim because that is a bizayon. Uktani the mana keneged mana. However, if you're going to weigh it up in this way, mana keneged mana, that would be acceptable. If you know how much the first piece of meat weighs, and you weigh it against that, mutar. Okay, so that essentially is the proof that we're trying to bring. That's the proof that we're trying to bring from Rabbi Yosha. We're saying that if I have a bechor, which turned out became a ba'amum, but nonetheless it's a bechor and it's kodshim, and therefore I can't weigh it up in the normal way. If I can't weigh it up in the normal way, that's a maaseh chol, that's a maaseh bizayon. But if I can weigh it mana keneged mana, that means that's enough for shinoy. That's the difference of the derech chol, and therefore I can do that over here. So how's the proof? So we're trying to establish how that's a proof of the Stam Mishnah and the following on the opinion of Rabbi Yeshua. So says Rashi, "Titnam psulei mukdashin anatan ekdesh v'shoklin mana keneged mana bebechor." He says, "Seifa d'mani tinaka." This is the end of the Mishnah. V'reisha hachiita. Here is how the beginning of the Mishnah says as follows: Kol psulei mukdashin nimkarin ba'atliz v'nishkalim belitra chutz min ha'bachor v'hamaaser shenayatan leba'alim. Aval, let me just read a little bit more and then we'll go back. Aval psulei mukdashin hayatan le'ekdesh v'shoklin mana keneged mana bebachor. Okay, so In other words, that's just the language of the Mishnah, and now he explains it. So says this is how we understand. Kol kodshim balei mumin shenifdu b'muman. So when I have kodshim, which are balei mum, in other words, I have an animal which was designated, was meant to go as a korban, but it's now bal mum. So I cannot bring that animal as a korban. What do? It has to be a process of pidyon. Shenifdu b'muman. In other words, because of the mum, I now switch that. I transfer the kedusha onto money, which I'll use to buy a different animal, and that animal goes out to chulin. Nonetheless, אף על פי שעדיין מקצת קדושה עליהן, right? Nonetheless, this animal still retains a certain element of קדושה, שאסרנה כתוב בגזע ועבודה, you're not allowed to share it or to work it, כדאמרינן בבחורות, תזבח ולא גזע וכולי. Okay, so that's all learnt out in the Gemara in Bechorot. Again, we won't get into the details now, but the point is that animal is a Baal Mum. It's no longer Kodshim, but it still has a certain element of Kedusha. We're now on the long line in Rashi, about halfway through the line. So he says, Afilu achi noagin maseh chulin bahen. Okay, so in other words, this animal has a bit of a quasi status. On the one hand, it still has a bit of, meaning it's not a korban, it still has a certain amount of kedusha, but you're still allowed to act in the manner of chulin. So all the other korbanot, you're allowed to kill them and weigh them and sell them in the normal way, right? When I'm talking about a korban which had a psul, balei mumin, chutz min ha-bechor va-maaser, with the exception of bechor and maaser. Bechor is what concerns us for now. Okay, these ones are different. Why is that? שהניית מכירתן ביוקר אינה להקדש, אלא לבעלים, לפי שאין הם פדיון במומם להיות מהם נכנסים לקדושתן. In other words, they have a different status, since when you sell them the money of the Bechor and the Maaser, that now the money does not go to Hekdesh, but the money goes to the owners. Therefore, right, and the reason why it says Bechor ne'emar lo tifter, Maaser ne'emar lo yigal, אלא נאכלים לבעלים במומם. But these are completely chulin animals which the owners get to eat. And therefore, in order to show that there's still a certain element of sanctity, they're actually paradoxically, but these ones are going to be a little bit more machmir. So he says, כך אין נוהגים בין מעשי חולין במכירת בשרם כשנפל בהם מום. ושחטום הבעלים. And therefore, when we are acting with these animals, which were going to be designated for hekdesh, but now there's maseh chulin, so you can sell it in the normal. We don't now act with it in the normal way. When you're going to go and sell them, whatever, you don't do that in the way you would with an ordinary animal. It's going to be a bizayon. Okay, so that's regarding these ones. Aval shal psulei hamukdashim hanayat mechiratan beyoker lekdesh. But with other korbanot, once they get a mum and you're selling them and redeeming them for extra money, that money is going to ekdesh. ואף שכבר נפתו קודם שחיטה, קודם בנייה אין נשחטין, תביא המדע והערכה, אפילו אחי הנהת מחירתם ביוקר להקדש. אוקיי. שלפי מה שיודע שנתן יפה הוא מוסיף פדיונו מתחילה, לפיכך מבזין אותן למוכרו בעתליו שהכל פונים שם לקח בשר. In other words, the summary is this, that we distinguish between two different types of korbanot. Those ones which when they become pasul and you sell them off and the extra money is going for Ekdesh, then there's no problem of selling it in the normal way and doing all the normal things you would with a piece of meat because the extra money is going to Ekdesh anyway. But here, by the Bechor and the Maaser, that's not the case. And therefore, so the point is, what emerges from this Mishnah is that when it comes to a Bechor, which was Shechter, and then it was discovered to be a Bar Mumra, I don't say that I can act in a derech chul. Therefore, I can't go and weigh it up on a scale in the normal way. Nonetheless, what does the Mishnah say? It says even though you can't go and weigh it up and sell it, you can weigh it in this mana keneged mana, meaning weigh a piece of meat against another piece of meat. That is not considered the same masechol. That is not considered the same bizayon. So if that's allowed over there in the case of Bechor, surely it's allowed here in the case of Yom Tov as well. That's the Stam Mishnah, and that follows the opinion of Rabbi Yeshua. Okay. In other words, we have two things. We have a Braita that tells us what Rabbi Yeshua holds regarding Yom Tov. So regarding Yom Tov, we now know there are three different opinions to weighing the meat. There's an opinion of Rabbi Yehuda that says you can only weigh the meat with a kli on the other side. There's an opinion of Chachamim that says you can't weigh the meat at all. And there's the opinion on the scales, and there's the opinion of Rabbi Yeshua. And Rabbi Yeshua says you can weigh it against another piece of meat. Now the Mishnah, the Gemara comes along and says, "This is Rav Yosef. Halacha follows Rabbi Yeshua." How do I know that halacha follows Rabbi Yeshua? Because we have a Stam Mishnah in Masechet Bechorot which holds like Rabbi Yeshua. Now the Mishnah in Masechet Bechorot doesn't say anything about Yom Tov, but all it says is that when I'm dealing with psulei muktashim, I'm dealing with korbanot, which animals which are going to be hekdesh, but now got a mum and therefore a pasul. Okay, so there's a question, how do I have to treat those animals? What level of sanctity do they still have? And we find, the Mishnah says, regarding a Bechor, that yes, you can't do a Masechol, that's going to be a Bizayon to that Bechor, but nonetheless, you are allowed to weigh it, Mana Keneged Mana. That is precisely what Rabbi Yeshua said. So we assume that it's the same. We assume that we can draw a parallel between the case of a Bechor, in the case of Kodshim, and the case of Yom Tov, and therefore Rabbi Yeshua's opinion is the one that is like the Stam Mishnah, and that is the way that we paskin. Okay, the Gemara is now going to go and challenge that assumption. It's going to say maybe there's a difference between the two cases. Okay, but we'll stop there. We'll end it here for today, and we will pick that up Bezrat Hashem next week, Wednesday.
You'll be in. I'm going to the States today for a couple of weeks. Are you going to be during the 3 weeks? I'll be back for the 23rd or 24th of July.
So I'm not sure. But then we may take a break.
You may be on vacation, right?
All
day.
We'll keep
okay, very
informed.
good. Okay, shkoyach.
Okay,
have a safe trip, everyone who's leaving.
Thank you. Yeah, I have a bar mitzvah. Okay, Bye bye.
Take care.
Go to.